Nigeria, a nation grappling with the pervasive grip of corruption, bears the deep scars of its colonial past. The British, during their reign, implemented policies that sowed the seeds of this enduring problem. They established a system of indirect rule, empowering local chiefs and administrators to act as intermediaries. While seemingly efficient, this approach created opportunities for these intermediaries to exploit their positions for personal gain. The British also prioritized the extraction of resources over the development of Nigeria. This disregard for the well-being of the colonized populace fostered an environment where self-enrichment took precedence over the common good. The colonial government's focus on cash crops like cocoa and groundnuts, while neglecting essential infrastructure and education, further exacerbated inequality and created fertile ground for corruption to thrive. Moreover, the legal and administrative systems established by the British were often susceptible to manipulation by those in power. This legacy of weak institutions, characterized by a lack of transparency and accountability, has continued to plague Nigeria long after independence. The colonial government's failure to address these systemic weaknesses allowed corrupt practices to become entrenched, casting a long shadow over Nigeria's post-colonial development. The British exit from Nigeria in 1960 marked the end of direct colonial rule, but left behind a complex web of challenges. The seeds of corruption sown during this era took root, shaping the political and economic landscape of independent Nigeria. As the nation grappled with the legacy of colonialism, it became evident that true independence required not only political freedom, but also the dismantling of the deeply ingrained systems of corruption that continued to hinder its progress. The euphoria of independence in 1960 quickly gave way to the harsh realities of nation building in Nigeria. The fledgling state inherited a legacy of corruption that was further exacerbated by the turbulent political landscape of the post-colonial era. Political instability, marked by frequent military coups and ethnic tensions, created an environment where corruption flourished. The first coup d'etat in 1966, just 6 years after independence, ushered in an era of military rule that would last for decades. These military regimes, often characterized by their authoritarianism and lack of accountability, became synonymous with widespread corruption. The concentration of power in the hands of a few, coupled with the absence of democratic checks and balances, allowed corruption to permeate all levels of government. Ethnic and regional divisions, exploited by self-serving politicians, further fueled corruption. The winner-takes-all nature of Nigerian politics incentivized politicians to prioritize their own ethnic groups or regions, often at the expense of national unity and development. This divisive political climate created opportunities for corrupt officials to amass wealth and power by exploiting ethnic loyalties. The failure to establish strong, independent institutions further compounded the problem. The judiciary, meant to be a bulwark against corruption, was often subject to political interference. The lack of an effective legal framework to investigate and prosecute corrupt officials created a culture of impunity, emboldening those in power to act with disregard for the rule of law. The discovery of oil in commercial quantities in the 1950s held the promise of prosperity for Nigeria. However, The influx of oil wealth, instead of being a blessing, became a curse, fueling corruption and exacerbating existing inequalities. The mismanagement of oil revenues became emblematic of the deeply rooted corruption that plagued the nation. The sudden surge in oil wealth created a rentier state where the government became overly reliant on oil revenues and neglected other sectors of the economy. This overdependence on oil made the Nigerian economy vulnerable to fluctuations in global oil prices and created opportunities for corruption in the oil sector. The Nigerian government, instead of investing oil wealth in education, healthcare, and infrastructure, often squandered it on grandiose projects that benefited a select few. The construction of the Ajaokuta Steel Company, intended to be a flagship project, became a notorious example of corruption, with billions of dollars invested over decades with little to show for it. The oil boom also led to the rise of a powerful elite class that amassed wealth through their connections to the government and the oil industry. This elite, often with little regard for the plight of ordinary Nigerians, used their influence to perpetuate a system that benefited them at the expense of the majority.